Hi. They asked me about my favorite Victorian event, and they were fools, because instead of doing that, I wrote a bunch of stuff about a whole historical process. So let me tell you all about my favorite historical Victorian event. In the year of our Lord 711, the Umayyad Caliphate invaded Spain. When they did this, they brought the oud with them. Now the oud is a wonderful stringed instrument, and it's a bit different from what they already had in Spain. They had the ancient Roman guitarra, which interacted interestingly with the oud. Together they're both string instruments, but they're shaped differently, but they try to combine the guitarra with the oud. And Andalusian Muslims had this thing that was the combination of them both called the guitarra, which then the Spanish called the guitarra. You might have recognized this as the guitar, which is exactly what it is. Now, to begin with, it had like 4 strings and was just, I don't know, it's some nice old twingy string instrument. But over time, they came up with this great idea of adding more strings to it. In the 1400s or 1500s, they added a 5th string. And then in 1779, an Italian fella, Gaetano Venaccia, added a 6th string to the guitar. Now that was off in Italy, but you can actually find the 6-string guitar on display naturally in the Museum of American History at the Smithsonian in DC. So in 1779, we have our first 6-string guitar. Now, in 1795, Kamehameha the Great unified the Hawaiian archipelago and created the unified Kingdom of Hawaii. Hawaii was in a central location in the Pacific, perfect for all sorts of trans-Pacific trade, back and forth and back and forth. So there was sailors coming from everywhere, from Russia, from Scotland, from Spain, and from Portugal. And these Spanish and Portuguese sailors in particular brought over all sorts of interesting things with them, including this guitar thing, which the Hawaiians took one look at and decided they could work with this a little bit. Now, to begin with, the guitar, as it was played at the time, is, you can imagine it, they just sort of strummed along. But the Hawaiians thought this was weird, and they decided to sort of like lay the guitar flat right on their laps and do this wonderful sort of nice stringy up and down thing with metal tubes, make this wonderful sound. That's all well and good. In the late 1880s, Hawaii was trying to westernize desperately. They were aware of all these imperial powers who recognized Hawaii's strategic location in the Pacific and were trying to vie for influence, and maybe they were going to try to annex Hawaii outright. So Hawaii had, over the course of the Victorian era, brought in a bunch of instructors, a bunch of advisors. They were trying to industrialize. They were trying to increase education within the kingdom. So there were small railroads across the islands now, largely for sugarcane plantations and the like. And there were kids going to different institutions. And at this point, there was a young man named Joseph Kikuku who one day was walking alongside one of these plantation railroads, found a loose bolt, picked it up, picked up his guitar, which he had, and tried to strum the guitar with the bolt. And he went, oh, that's a really great sound. And this was the steel guitar. This is where it began, in either 1885 or 1889. There's a couple of different dates written down in different places. And Joseph Kikuku, that's his stage name, by the way, experimented with this for some good years until in 1905, he went to the mainland United States. Now, in between then, of course, the Kingdom of Hawaii was overthrown in 1893 and then annexed by the United States in 1898. So by the time Kikuku went to the United States mainland, he was already subject of the United States. Now, in 1752, Benjamin Franklin flew a kite during a thunderstorm. And that kite had a little key attached to it, and lightning struck that kite, and it went through the key and went to Ben Franklin, and he discovered electricity. America, of course, invented electricity because of this. This new electrical current that was discovered got experimented with. In 1821, Michael Faraday started to experiment with electrical motors, and by the late 1800s, electricity was a known thing. It was beginning to be commercialized. In 1878, I think it was, Thomas Edison, boo hiss, created a commercially viable light bulb, which he began selling. Edison's light bulb encouraged further propagation of electricity within the United States. You need electricity to have a light bulb, so people wanted more and more power lines everywhere so they could get this wonderful new light bulb and actually have well-lit rooms and such. People started to experiment with electricity in all sorts of ways. Now, we have a guitar here, and we have electricity. Between the two of these things, you can start to do fun little things and sort of, I don't know, amplify the sound of the guitar. And people were very interested in this because also in 1877, Thomas Edison actually did invent something called the phonograph. Now, the phonograph is great because you can record things and then play it back. And much sort of like the light bulb, what this did was it encouraged people to listen to more stuff. People suddenly were able to listen to music all the time, but you need to have more recordings to listen to more music, which then brings us back to Joseph Kikuku in 1905 coming to the United States. Because one of the first things he did was he introduced this steel guitar to Los Angeles, this weird, obscure little city on the West Coast, and they started to record Joseph Kikuku and his steel guitar off in Los Angeles. And other artists, largely from Hawaii, started to come in with their steel guitars and they started to record. At the same time, people from further east in California, cowboy guitarists, started to come to California as well, so they could get their sound recorded, because everybody needs to sell more and more records, at which point the Hawaiian steel guitar was introduced to cowboy music, and you started to hear in the 19-teens and 1920s all sorts of interesting fusions of this new, really sort of Pan-American Western music develop. And then they have the amplifier involved. They start to amplify their music. They start to introduce electricity. The first full-blown electric guitar is invented in 1931 and commercialized in 1932. So now you can have a fully electric guitar hooked up and you can strum along at any sort of volume whatsoever. And you start to experiment now, because now it's not just guitars. You have a machine, and you're really messing around with that machine. And you can do all sorts of weird stuff. Increase the volume. Oh, this sounds weird. This sounds messed up. Or you can travel around with your speakers and accidentally drop them, and now there's little tears. And now the sound is starting to get really weird and really scratchy. And you end up with all sorts of strange sounds. And finally, in 1951, you have Jackie Brentson perform and record the song Rocket 88. Now, Rocket 88 is the first time you have a truly distorted guitar recorded. And from there, all sorts of new worlds in music open up. Later on, you have the Beatles and their song Helter Skelter, and that becomes an even heavier distorted sound. And from there, you can mess around. You can have punk music start to develop. You finally are able to have metal. And all this from this introduction of an old Iberian instrument to Hawaii in the middle of the Victorian era. This is my favorite little event that spans 1,200 years, and this is my favorite little thing from the Victorian era.